This is President Truman from back in the days. As the situation is unfolding in the Gaza Strip and in Israel, a lot of people have been looking back to the history. Our good friend David Smith just did this awesome debate not too long ago. And the great thing about...
With who? Was it against...
Austin? Austin
wait.
something. It's a morning show, but it was great. But what's great about Scott Horton, David Smith, and Clint is they go back to the history. They understand the history. That's why we have George here today, because he understands the history better than anybody. George, take a look at this, and I got a couple questions for you right after it.
We had several other people in the country, even among the Jews, the Zionists particularly, who were against anything that was to be done if they couldn't have the whole of Palestine and everything handed to them on a silver plate so they wouldn't have to do anything. It couldn't be done. We had to take it in small doses. You can't move 5 or 6 million people out of a country and fill it up with 5 or 6 million more and expect both sets of them to be pleased.
49.
But don't think that decision to recognize Israel is an easy one. I had to make a compromise with the Arabs and divide Palestine. The Jews wanted to chase all the Arabs into the Tigris and Euphrates River, and the Arabs wanted to chase all the Jews into the Red Sea. And what I was trying to do was to find a homeland for the Jews and still be just with the Arabs.
I remember his famous quotes about how he I hate you both when he was done doing whatever it is he did.
Yeah.
I remember that being a famous quote about him.
Yeah.
It wasn't exactly that, but something like that.
Listen, we often talk about JFK getting David Ben-Gurion to resign. He was the first prime minister of Israel. I think there was definitely this kind of hierarchy back in the days where the United States president was in charge. Nowadays, it seems almost like the Likud party is in charge
because
right now.
Because it's called black. What do you think Epstein did for a living?
Yeah.
So Ben-Gurion, what's his name? Richard from Grand Theft World was who I don't think it was Truman at the time, but after the war when they started, they said you could either have revenge or you could have your nation. That's why the Nuremberg trials were kind of just like the losers they didn't care about, and the other bad Nazis, we kept them and restaffed them around the world. So and then Israel went and got some of the criminals on their own after.
Yeah.
But they had blackmail on Rockefeller and Allen Dulles, and Prescott Bush took the hit for Dulles. Nothing happened to him. But
I mean, they also had a plan where they were kind of saying, let's change your leadership when it comes to Israel. George, why don't you jump in here with this? This is right down your alley. I mean, my question to you today is, even with this speech over here where you see Truman kind of saying, I got to make sure that both sides are happy, we still funded this whole thing. We still gave the go-ahead. It was by our decision. You've made a video before saying that Israel has had decades of bad relationships with Arab leaders, and you called them practical Arab leaders that really didn't want a lot. Even when it talks about Rabin and Yasser Arafat, it seemed like the PLO was like, sure, we'll take 22% if you stop bombing us. Your thoughts?
No, that's absolutely right. So let's keep in mind that when the first United Nations plan for the partition of Palestine, that essentially assigned 60% of British mandated Palestine to Israel, 40% to the Palestinians. But then there was the war, and essentially then Israel took 80%. When Israel was then admitted into the United Nations, the important condition was that Israel addresses the refugee problem. I mean, so that was the condition. It wouldn't have been allowed to join the United Nations. But then, of course, Israel never did address the refugee problem. And this went on for years. And then we had the 1967 war, in which Israel obviously started, even though the massive Israeli propaganda machine went around the world saying, oh, the Arabs, they want to drive us into the sea. They're all a bunch of crazies. They want to drive us into the sea, which, of course, wasn't true. Israel started that war. Israel then took over essentially what was left of British-mandated Palestine by taking over the West Bank and Gaza. That was it. Israel now was in control of 100% of Palestine. Now, at this stage, when they adopted the Resolution 242 in 1967, what Israel was told to vacate the occupied territory. So that it had to vacate. And in return, the Arab states would normalize relations with Israel. Israel had no intention of vacating any of these territories. And so when in 1969, at that stage, the United States was still reasonably even-handed in its approach. So William Rogers was Nixon's Secretary of State, presented what was called the Rogers Peace Plan. He said that, okay, in return for the return of the occupied territories, there would be a normalization of relations between the Arab states, and there would have to be a just solution to the refugee problem. There wasn't even any talk of a Palestinian state. There was just a just solution to the refugee problem, which was at least also in accord with all the United Nations resolutions. Nasser, who again was presented in the media, he was the sort of the Arafat, PLO extremist, the Hamas of his day. Oh, he's so irrational. He's such a, he's so crazy, full of his pan-Arabist socialist ideology. He agreed to this. He accepted the Rogers Plan. He said that's the basis for a negotiated outcome. Israel flatly rejected this. And then, of course, Kissinger kind of outmaneuvered Rogers and took a much more pro-Israeli position, which wasn't really to Nixon's satisfaction, but Nixon was increasingly bogged down by Watergate, couldn't really control Kissinger, and so that whole initiative, the Rogers Peace Plan, was abandoned. And from then on, almost all administrations tended to always lean on Israel. Oh, we have to do whatever we can for Israel, even though there were innumerable Arab leaders, Arab peace initiatives that Israel blithely ignored, and that no U.S. administration ever really pressed Israel on.
Yeah, it makes me just think about Rabin, right? Like, we've had Norman Finkelstein on the show before, recently, and he a couple years ago was on another show talking about, well, the people of Israel seem to be a lot more intense, a lot more radical. I don't want to use the term racist, but a lot more anti-Palestinian for sure, and you can see that. But there seems to be a time at one point there was a common sense approach. Do you think Rabin was trying to come to some type of peace agreement? Because then even Yasser Arafat was willing to accept, the deal at one point. I mean, I'm trying to figure out at what point it really changed hardcore to now the Palestinians aren't going to get a state. We just have to expel them all because we can't live side by side because they want to drive us into the sea. So what do you think about Rabin? Was there a time where a two-state solution was possible?
Well, for a while I thought that, but I think that it really was a fraud. I think what they were trying to do was to make it out as if somehow we're going to move towards a Palestinian state. But, they wanted to use Arafat, the Palestinian Authority, to control the Palestinian population, even as they continued building the settlement. So the measure of whether Rabin or the Israelis were ever serious about Oslo, ever serious about creating a two-state solution is, did they ever stop the building of settlements? No. It accelerated during the Oslo years. So, by 1993, from 1993 to 1999, 2000, when pretty much the whole Oslo process collapsed, there was a massive escalation of settlement building. So they were always thinking in terms of, policing the Palestinians, and then eventually lopping off a big chunk of the West Bank and annexing it. Again, the most fertile land, the land that has the best water resources. But I think that was always the policy. But even what Rabin did was too wildly extreme, too pro-Arab for some of the Israeli crazies.
Yeah. Well, what do you think they're looking for now? Because obviously the United States government and Joe Biden, they keep on throwing out this two-state solution that they're still standing by. Even the Russians, are talking about 1967 and trying to hold the Israelis to that agreement of sorts. What do you think the Israeli government wants now, and what do you think is possible with everything we've seen since October 7th?
Well, I would imagine Israel would definitely like to ethnically cleanse Gaza. They would just love pushing them all out. The problem Israel has is that neither Egypt nor Jordan will play ball with Israel because they know exactly what Israel is trying to do, and they're not going to play because they say, well, we're not going to be a party to this massive ethnic cleansing campaign. I mean, and again, as others have pointed out, including Norman Finkelstein, Gaza is already essentially populated by the descendants of the people who were expelled in 1948. So in other words, these are already refugees and the descendants of refugees. So now the idea is to make these descendants of refugees once again. There's no upside for Egypt and Jordan because they're going to be hated throughout the Arab world if they started cooperating with Israel in this ethnic cleansing campaign. So they're not going to do it. And there's going to be a lot of pressure applied against Egypt. Oh, please, please, please open up the Rafah gate. But they said, no, we're not going to be a party to Israel. Now, Israel probably is going to really put a lot of pressure. I mean, if they start driving many Palestinians from the North Gaza into the South, so they really, just packed everybody into a kind of a sardine can, that there is going to be enormous kind of pressure on that Egypt has to do the humanitarian thing and open the gate. But I don't think Egypt is going to play ball with that. I mean,
Can we talk
the
a little bit
Egyptians
more
saw what
about
happened
that?
to Mubarak.
Yeah.
That's what's going to happen to Sisi.
Let's stay right here because Kurt's got, because I want to talk about Egypt.
So we covered the story of that memo from Likud Party about, because it makes me laugh when I watch who's I watching? I think
you're talking about 2019 from the Likud Party.
Well, the thing is, we're going to make Canada. They're cool with taking a bunch of immigrants.
Oh, that story.
Europe is cool with it. I think they kind of know Egypt doesn't want to play ball. Like they know what the game, because obviously the game is, we're just going to keep killing them. If you care, I guess you'll let them into your country, right? We're just going to squish them down. Something's got to give. They'll die or you'll do what we want. So they're not going to do what they want. They know that, Likud and whatever maniacs. So they have that memo that they're going to send them to Europe. In fact, all those protests that all these right-wingers want suppressed right now, that's because they've been taken, right? You can leave Gaza as long as you never come back. You can get out of that prison. They'll even, I believe, Dan Cohen said pay for it, but you have to be gone forever. And where they go, Europe, all the places where they're tearing down the posters and hanging up flags, that's because these countries had to absorb. So I think that's the big plan is we either kill them or we'll push them in these other countries we don't care about.
I want to talk about, George, and, kind of piggyback on what Kurt said there too as well. This is the rhetoric that a lot of people are using out there, especially from the populist right. Jesse Waters used it. Donald Trump Jr. used it. Well, Egypt won't take them. It's very cryptically racist.
I've heard that nonstop.
I wonder why.
Why does
Egypt? Do they know something that we don't know about these Palestinians?
I didn't think it was that. No, I didn't think it was that. I think it's...
That's what Donald Trump Jr. said the other day.
Well, that's a little bit extra cleverness.
Jesse Waters is like, why won't they take... They've been all kind of...
That's just to reinforce... That's the thing I've heard for years when people would argue, like Cellar Table.
What are they insinuating, Kurt?
No, they're nothing. They're going, oh, they're Muslims. Let the Muslims handle it. All the Muslims, there's Shia Muslim and Sunni. That's all there is. Doesn't matter what country. They're all that. Well, Muslims care so much. Why don't you take them? And then my friends who are Egyptian, we go, we don't like them either. We just don't like Israel. So nobody cares about these people. Nobody. They use them the way America, the Democrats used abortion rights. They don't actually care about you having the rights. It's a thing to run on. But the actual people in those countries, that's what I find interesting. Like you just said, Steve, the Mubarak will end up like a Sisi or whichever one's in charge. The regular people buy into the fact that their government kind of cares, and they're mad. And these countries, they're just held together by U.S. funding and nonsense. So if the people turn against them, they're screwed.
I'm a little bit. I feel a little bit different. I wonder what George feels because I feel when they say, well, do they know something we don't know? I think they're trying to imply, insinuate that all the Palestinians are bad, just like a lot of Zionists. They're like they're going to grow up to be a terrorist anyways. These kids, so you know what I'm saying?
I don't disagree. That's a new emergency spin on a very bad look. Everybody has been saying, why doesn't Egypt take care of it? No one was thinking that thing. Jesse Waters, it was such a creep trying to seduce old ladies on TV is what he looks like. They've got to think of ways to make this very obvious bad look not so bad. So that's his job is to think of a creative way to make that stupid thing he's saying, why doesn't Egypt do it? Or they belong in Jordan. That's their new spin on it. I mean, maybe it's an old spin. That's why it's being pushed now. George,
what do you think? Is this cryptically racist of sorts here when they say this?
No, you're absolutely right, Craig, because I remember, and I'm old enough to remember, that in 1982, when Israel invaded Lebanon, in order, to destroy the PLO, just like they invade Gaza in order to destroy Hamas. That was so we destroy the PLO. The cry was, hey, look, the Lebanese don't want them. No wonder, they don't like them any more than we do. It was exactly the same argument. What Jesse Waters, what Donald Trump Jr. is saying, well, look, these are the people. These people are so bad, these Palestinians, so horrid, that even the Egyptians don't want them. Even, the Jordanians don't want them. How can you blame us, the Israelis or pro-Israelis, not wanting them? That's their argument. But of course, the point here is that it is Israel's responsibility. Israel is the occupying power of Gaza. It is Israel's responsibility to protect the people of Gaza. It isn't Egypt's responsibility.
Right.
It wasn't. You go back to 1948. It wasn't Egypt that was assigned the task of addressing the refugee problem. It wasn't Jordan's problem. It is Israel's problem. And so what they're trying to do is to shift the burden onto Egypt and Jordan, and it's not their problem. It is Israel's problem. Israel took over Gaza. Israel took this territory in 1967, and it hasn't done what an occupying power is supposed to do. They built settlements. They did dismantle settlements in Gaza. They haven't in West Bank, but they built settlements and then essentially control everything, what goes in, what goes out from Gaza, and do nothing for the population. So they're violating the Geneva Conventions, I don't know how many times over by what they do. But now they're trying to shift it onto, well, it's Egypt. Oh, Egypt has to do something. Why doesn't Egypt do something? It isn't Egypt's problem.
Yeah. Let's put a bow on this section. I got a couple more sections. The next section I want to talk a little bit more about Hamas, of course. But just final question, George, for this particular section is, at the end of the day, what do you think is going to happen with this situation as you see it unfolding right now? Obviously, I think that you have a belief, and correct me if I'm wrong, that Israel's beef is not necessarily with Hamas. It's more with the Palestinians. They want them gone. They want that land. I think we're kind of all been saying this for weeks, and this is just our opinion, everybody. You can have yours. But what do you think is going to happen right now? Because as we're sitting back and watching this, it's a different game. We have social media now, and no matter how much they try to suppress it, we can see what's going on. Not to mention, I also watched your video with Mohammed Marandi and Peter, and the IDF is not ready for this war. I've been saying this for quite some time.
I think you're right about that.
Oh, I know I'm right about that, because all of a sudden
I based it on the 7-hour lack of response to when Hamas.
Well, not even that. Just do the showing videos now in the Knesset and the party where they're coming out and they're crying and they're seeing IDF soldiers getting killed. And I don't know if whether you think it's an inside job or not, or a natural occurrence, whatever. At the end of the day, at the end of the day, they're not ready for this. I think the only reason why
we got to be dragged in. Huh? Of course they're not. That's why we got to be dragged in.
Well, we're. I mean, that's the thing. That if they think, and that's something
we're going to occupy. They want us.
They want us to put our green berets and our seals on the ground.
We'll watch it for them. That's the idea. I swear to God, that's their.
Well, they're not going to go in there and just do any. This is Mohammed Marandi talked about this. This is tunnel warfare. As soon as they try to, a couple weeks ago, I reported on it. I was sitting here in this chair when they try to go in halfway through the Gaza Strip. They had to retreat on foot. Tanks are almost useless in this type of war. This is tunnel warfare, and the Al-Qassam Brigade is way more prepared for it than the IDF. So what are your thoughts on what's going to happen right now? Let's put a bow on it right now and finish up this section before we get to the next one. George Szamuely, go ahead.
No, I absolutely agree with you. I think that there's a lot of big talk from Israeli publicists, we're so strong, this is going to be the final solution, no more Gaza wars. This is going to be the last one, we're going to clean out Gaza. They don't have the will. They don't have the resources. They don't have the manpower. They don't have the military skill. They don't have the military courage.
They don't have the guts
to do what's necessary to drive out 2 million people. They're not going to be able to do it. So it's a lot of big talk, because Israel has been very skillful, and its publicists even more skillful, at presenting Israel as this invincible power. It's always 1967, forever 1967. We're boom, boom, take that and this. How they said, oh, Israel can take on Iran, and boom, in a Sunday afternoon, by Sunday evening, it's already over. No, Israel cannot do any of these things. Israel doesn't have the resources. So I think they're going to continue, for a little while longer, pulverizing Gaza. Israel can do that. It's not hard to pulverize a piece of territory. And then they're going to call it a day. I don't think they're going to go for any of these, big, wild scenarios. And so it will be just like we had 2009, 2014, 2017. We go back, we kick the can down the road, and then we wait for the whole thing to start up again in 3 years' time.
Yeah.
Wait, you're not worried about Iran because this is a great opportunity for us to get in war with Iran. So you're not afraid. I hope you're right. You don't think that we're going to be drawn into a thing with Iran, and that causes a whole World War III.
Go ahead, George.
I'm just asking.
Yeah. I don't think Iran wants to go. I don't think the United States wants to get involved in a war with Iran, because if Israel does provoke a war with Iran, then obviously there will be pressure for the United States to get involved. I think the United States will tell Israel just to cool it. Don't provoke a war with Iran. And Netanyahu, whatever else you can say about him, he's very shrewd. And he knows that he can't push the Americans too much. There's a point at which the Americans will say, well, enough already. So I don't think he's going to try and provoke Iran, because he's got the problem, which is the Americans might say, hey, you're on your own. You deal with Iran.
But you wouldn't be surprised, I think. We had a House vote. We had a resolution House vote that said the Congress could do whatever any means necessary to curtail Iran, and that just passed the other day. We're going to go over that. Thomas Massey pushed back. Yeah. I don't think you'd be surprised, George. I mean, I don't know who's zooming who here, right? I don't know who's pulling the strings.
If he doesn't keep the war going.
Who?
Netanyahu. They were already mad at him. There was already almost a civil war.
But here's what they'll do. They'll stop and go, okay, enough is enough. They've made it so inhabitable in the northern part of Gaza. They'll retract and pull back, because they understand they don't want Hezbollah getting involved right now, and they'll just make it so that it's so uninhabitable that a lot of those people will leave.
But what happens to him afterwards?
I don't know what happens to him.
You don't think he'll do everything to keep it going to cover his ass?
Look, they've already tried to get rid of him once, and he's come back. This guy is like a blood-sucking vampire that you can't get rid of.
And just to add on to what you said is that, remember Ariel Sharon? Sharon was completely discredited by the Lebanon war. He was gone. He resigned in disgrace, and we all assumed, well, that's the end of Sharon, bye-bye. And then he was back as prime minister a few years later. So Netanyahu may well calculate, okay, I resign in disgrace. 10 years' time, I could be back. He's still relatively young.
Here's the thing.
If he makes peace, like how Sharon, everybody turned on him because he tried some meager peace thing, right? They didn't they pray for him to die or some crazy thing?
Yeah. Listen,
that's how he'd be at.
At one point, they had a problem starting a Zionist country because they couldn't get enough Israelis, Jewish people to come there. The thing that keeps coming up in my mind was on that day, remember the airport in Israel, in Tel Aviv? It was loaded. They don't have the stomach for this. People were going. Yep. So they can't let people leave. So they need a ceasefire and to stop, because they can't get into a tunnel warfare situation and they start losing 18, 19-year-old IDF soldiers. Then Netanyahu will be in serious trouble. So what I think they're trying to do is bomb as much as they can, go to an immediate halt, have a ceasefire deal with both Hezbollah and Hamas, let everything calm down again. But now you've displaced 1.5 million people in the Gaza Strip. A lot of them are going to leave. So at the end of the day, it's like, okay, operation really good. You know what I'm saying? And then, like you said, we always kick this can down the road. 2014, it's 2023. And then in 2029, they'll do it again.
So you're going to ship them where? To Canada and Spain, like that memo?
Yeah. That's exactly. They're going to spread them out all. Listen,
those riots should be
We've
good.
been doing this for so long. We talked about why there's so many people at the southern border over here, because we're occupying Latin America, right? So it's not something that, we got some cheap labor jobs for them to do over here. We'll bring them on in, who knows? But that's just my theory, because I'm trying to figure out a way. I don't think that Netanyahu is that stupid that he really thinks that he can win in an invasion. You know what I'm saying? Like, you have Jesse Waters going, I don't know why they didn't invade right away and go underneath. He goes, because they'll lose. But
I hate that guy's face so much, Jesse Waters. I mean, I hate him.
That's George's favorite Fox host over there. Don't be saying that. Let's, George, you got anything else to say before we get to the next part? Because I wanna talk a little bit about how the mainstream media in the States is still yelling and screaming Hamas, 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 as if that okays and condones the killing of civilians. But do you have anything to say about this really quickly before we jump on out of here?
No, I just confirm what you said, which is that Israel doesn't have a stomach for what is a very, very nasty fight. Going into these tunnels, they're booby-trapped, hand-to-hand combat. Israel has never been very good at that. It's always shied away from that. So I think it's just a fantasy world, by people like
Krav
that.
Maga won't work.
You can just do anything. They can't.
It's too small. The tunnels are too small for Krav Maga.
They can't get the Krav Maga going in it.
Come see us doing live shows. We're going to be in Levittown, Red Bank, New Jersey, Wilmington, Delaware, Covina, California, Burbank, California, Oxnard, California, Venice, California, Palmdale, California, Omaha, Nebraska, Des Moines, Iowa, Milwaukee, and Lansing, Michigan. Go to jimmydore.com for a link for all those tickets.